And it's going to cycle through here. And then it'll tell us what our total timing is and give us our individual timing.
Today on Hot Track RC, we're going to focus on dialing up the performance on this Kyosho Brushless Le Mans 240 Gold motor. We want to get these two cars to the track sometime in the future once we get them all built up, and we need a couple motors that are performing well but on an even playing field. So we're going to look at KV, timing, current draw, maybe do a little rotor shaft shimming. So stick around! We're going to use the Sky RC motor analyzer. It's pretty much the standard if you look for one of these anywhere. But what do we need to look at to set up two motors to run and perform about the same? Well, the first thing we're going to look at is KV. Now, KV is like the third rail of RC. It seems that most people who talk about this tend to get a little bloody in the comments section. But I think if we work through it together, I'm sure we'll get some really helpful information that comes out of that process. You know, I'm going to make it as simple as possible. I'm not going to get into talking about back EMF and Faraday's law. So just what we need to know to really optimize the performance of this particular style motor. So what is KV? It's basically how fast the motor is per volt. So if you apply 1 volt to the motor, you multiply that by the KV, and that's your RPM. So whatever that KV is, that's what it should run at 1 volt. Then if you're using a 2-cell LiPo, you're at 8.4 volts, multiply that times the KV, and you get your RPM. Now, we're usually not going to use that particular RPM number to do calculations. You might, but that's further than I'm going to go with it. I just want to be able to understand, am I making the motor faster and thereby the car faster or not? If I've already selected a motor, and most of us, we select a motor for RC based maybe on a class. Maybe we want to be, compliant with 17.5 turn class or 13.5 or 22.5, or we just want to go all out and get a 6.5, but we kind of have an idea of how many turns we're going to go with. So then, you've got the motor and you think to yourself, well, how can I make this as fast as it can be? I've got a particular motor. In this case, this is a 13.5 turn brushless. But how can I get the most out of this motor that's possible? Well, the question is, if the KV tells me how fast the motor is going to turn at a given voltage, is there any way to affect the KV once I've selected a particular motor? The answer is yes. You can do that with timing. Timing on an electric motor is a lot like an internal combustion engine. You've got your air-fuel mixture that's getting sucked into the chamber, and then your piston starts to compress as it moves upward, and now you want to ignite that with your spark plug. But when do you set the spark plug to ignite the gases? Well, you might think that you do it right when the piston's at the top dead center, and then it'll push it down. But the piston's moving up and down really fast, and if you wait until it's all the way at the top, then by the time it ignites and starts to expand, your piston's already moved down because the crankshaft's pulling it down, and you've lost a lot of your energy. And the faster you're going, the more advanced you might want to ignite your gases. So in actuality, you ignite your fuel-air mixture as the piston is still coming up. But if you ignite it too early, then you would actually be expanding the gases while the piston is trying to come up, and obviously that would be very inefficient and even damaging to your engine. Well, with an electric motor, it's very similar. Exactly when do we want to fire that phase so that it starts to attract the rotor magnet to the next pole position? Well, we want to do it a little early, but not too early. Most motors from the manufacturer come at a really mild timing setting, maybe 30 degrees, 35 degrees, and we can push that a lot further. But at some point, it will become very inefficient, where we're adding a lot more current to get not much more power out of the motor or speed out of the motor. So as we're trying to get this motor basically to spin faster, to drive the car faster, what's the limiting factor? And here's kind of a key point. That is when your ESC is commanding your motor to run at a certain speed, it's using a certain voltage, then the motor draws a certain amount of current. And the ESC will try to provide the amount of current that the motor requires to reach the RPM. So if the motor has got the voltage, but it's not at the RPM it's supposed to be at, then the ESC is going to start feeding it more current. If we start dialing up the timing too much, then the current draw is just going to get out of control. And the motor becomes very inefficient. With the motor, we're sort of repelling the magnet on the rotor a little bit. So then we have to add more and more current to get more out of the portion of the rotation where it starts to really attract. So things just get bad at that point. You're feeding more and more and more current in and not getting much back in return except a lot of heat. So that's where we want to look at the inflection point and settle at that sweet spot. That is really the limiting factor for performance with RC cars is how much heat can you generate and dissipate without the temperature getting too high. How high is too high? Well, at 160 F, you're in the range where you're going to start damaging parts. But you probably shouldn't get over 140. There's one other thing that you can do to get more speed out of your car. So once you set your timing, then you start running and you think, oh, well, I'm testing my motor temperature and it's running pretty cool. So I could dial up the timing more. Maybe you want to do that. But the other thing you can do is gearing, right? And now gearing, same thing. It's going to reflect more torque back to the motor. So now the motor is pressing against more torque force, however you want to think about it, more resistance as you increase your gearing. So you're going to a larger pinion gear or a smaller spur gear. So now that's going to create more heat. And again, because the motor is trying to reach its velocity for a given voltage, it has more resistance to work against, it's going to start demanding more current from the ESC. So, same situation now, right? It's got to get to that velocity point, but it can't get there without drawing a lot of current. So, when you overgear the motor, now you're going to start overheating again. So, if you're overheating, what's the problem? Is it gearing or is it timing? Well, if you set up your timing initially and verified that that was before that inflection point, and probably 45 degrees is usually in the safe range for most motors, and then you get to like 46, 47 and things start happening. Maybe you can get up to 48, maybe you can go farther, but now you're in that unstable range where current draw could really be going up fast. But if you already did the calculations on that, then you would start looking at gearing if you're overheating and thinking, well, maybe I'm overgeared. Let me pull that back a tooth on the pinion, a couple teeth on the pinion, and see where we're at.
Before we get going on analyzing this motor, we need to check out the in play. But what is in play and why do I care? So on pretty much all motors that you're going to receive, when you push this rotor shaft in and out, you're going to notice that it slides back and forth, sometimes a pretty good distance. Now, this one is definitely moving a noticeable distance. So, what difference does that make? Well, there's Hall effect sensors back here that are feeding information to the ESC on this sensored motor, and we need that information to be consistent. But as the rotor shaft is moving further away and then getting closer to those Hall effect sensors, it's going to fool those sensors into thinking the position is shifting. So we don't want that. And before we start trying to time the motor out, we need to get this more consistent. So to do that, we need to tear the motor down. So first thing we're going to do is pull out the screws that adjust the timing that are attached to the Hall effect sensor board. And we'll take those out one at a time. There might be 2 or 3. Motors are constructed a little bit differently, but this motor, because it's supposed to look like a vintage motor, it's not vented, which is definitely not going to help us with our heat. It looks cool, but... Okay, so now here's our Hall effect board, and we can turn that. That's what you do to change the timing, but right now we're just trying to tear this down. So now we're going to take the main truss bolts out of the motor that hold the end bells together. Now, this board is sort of held in place by some tabs, and if we turn this around, there is a point where it'll lift out, but we can also just pull off the whole end bell. Okay, so we don't want to break anything here, so we're going to be real gentle, but if I put this in here and try to wedge a little bit, there it goes. I caught an edge, and it popped right off. So now we've got our ring that's loose, and our Hall effect sensor board, it's still trapped underneath there. Okay, the reason that's trapped is because the rotor shaft is putting pressure on the bearing and not wanting to release that. So let's try to find a place where this will come off. All right, there, I got my ring out. Okay, this is just a retaining ring. The main thing is not to put any extreme forces on anything. Now I can pull this off. Just wants to stick a little bit. Here it comes. And there. Okay, so in here are our Hall effect sensors. They're on a board, and the accuracy with which those are placed on that board is going to determine some of the performance of the motor. So we'll hope that those are well aligned. Okay, now, so we've got our board, we've got our retaining ring, and now we've got a view of the inside of our motor. We can see some of those windings that are creating resistance, but can see the 3 poles, or phases, I mean, 3 phases. The poles are on the rotor. So now we can do 2 things here. Let's try pulling this rotor shaft out. We'll push it down a little bit. See if we can urge it out. Okay, there it goes. And then I found if we can get it out to a point here. Okay, now I forgot to do something that's kind of nice. This kit comes with a bushing that you can put in there to kind of guide things out. And that helps a lot. Look at that. That slides so much better like that. Okay. Now, if I put my shock shaft pliers, whoops, there is one of my spacers. We'll come back to that. Put these on, and I can just pull that out. Okay, now, watch out. There'll probably be another spacer here, which there is on the other end. And we want to remember where those are, because those are positioning this rotor shaft with respect to the Hall sensor in the right place. So now let's take a look at this. Here's the spacer that we had. This is basically our magnet, and the magnet is creating some interaction with those Hall effect sensors, and we want this to be as close to here as possible. We're going to add a shim, and we're going to put it on the outside here. And we're going to go with a 2.5 millimeter shim. These are not actually motor shims, but they are aluminum, so electrically they won't cause a problem. They're for a 3 millimeter screw. Because they're for a screw and not a rotor shaft, they're really close fit, because screws are undersized and rotor shafts are right on. This one slides on well. Okay. Now, we're going to put that at the bottom so that our factory shim is what's touching our bearing. And see, this shim's a little larger, just taking up a little space between the rotor and this factory shim. Now, again, why did I put the shim out here instead of over here? Well, I don't want to make the rotor any further away from the Hall effect sensors. So I'm assuming that the factory distance is about right. Now, if I were really getting into this, I could go in here and try to reduce this shim height and see how close I could get this to the Hall effect. But at some point, you're going to start rubbing, and that's dangerous, so we don't want to do that. And also, I don't have, it would be a pain to stack up enough spacers to get to this height, even though I do have some thicker ones, but I'm not going to mess with that. I just want it to be a consistent distance. So I've added this 0.25 millimeter thick shim right there. I did something off camera, which I'll show you here in a minute. I had an idea of how much in-play was in this motor already, and I'll show you what that looks like. That's a good thing to do because then you know kind of how much thickness to put in there and you don't have to take the motor apart, put it back together so many times. Be aware that when you pull these rotor shafts out, you know, shims can go flying everywhere. So try to contain things. All right, we've got our bushing in there and we just settle this in and it went flying into place. All right, so now before we put this all back together, we want to do one other thing, and that is we want to oil the bearings. So I get a little bit in there. That motor bearing will suck that right in. And then the only way to get to this rear bearing is to take the motor apart, and it says to oil it, so you have no choice but to take this apart to get in here to oil this bearing. Okay, so let's now start to reassemble. Okay, so make sure we've got our rear shim still on here, and we've got our bushing out now. And to get this rear bearing assembly on, what we want to do is instead of forcing this down and trying to move it around, we want to push down on the shaft so that this protrudes out so that I can get the bearing lined there. Now my bearing's on, and now I can start to move it back up and align this into the motor, and now we're in place. Now your front bell might start trying to come off at the same time. All right, so now everything's lined back up. We've got to make sure we get markings in the right place. So here's our timing markings right here. Okay, and those timing markings will align with this right here. Okay, so here's the arrow. But a couple things here. One, this ring has a notch in it. It will only go on like this. And if I push this down just a little bit, I should be able to slide this ring underneath. Okay, could have put that on first, but anyway. Okay, so now this ring is on. It will only go on one way, and that puts the timing marks right there. Okay, so we don't have to worry about having done that wrong. Now, but where does this little connector go, and how should this be positioned? So this has a notch in it, right? And then we need our arrow to be pointed up. So we need to work this around now. All right, I'm going to turn it a notch, and now I'm in the right place. Now notice there's 3 notches there. So I was able to rotate that. Now we can see our timing mark is about where we need it to be here. Okay, and it really doesn't matter at this very moment where I put that. Now I'm going to take this off so that I can put my truss screws back in. And now we're going to just snug these up one at a time. Now I can rotate that a little bit. Okay, and we'll put this at as close to 0 as possible, but we'll get our screws in first. Then we'll see where our backlash is. Now, I know that the end play in this motor when I started was about 15 thousandths of an inch. And I put like a 10 or 12 thousandths shim in there. So let's see where we're at. That's pretty close to 0, maybe slightly under. Now, one of the things that is interesting about this motor is that the timing mark just says 0 where it comes from the factory. Or it doesn't say anything. It says plus 10, minus 10. So it doesn't indicate an absolute timing. A lot of motors do. They say 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. This motor does not. So not that we would rely on those absolute numbers. You got to check it anyway. But with this motor, you don't know for sure what it's set at when it's at 0. All right, now, how much in play do we have? Oh, that feels real good. I'm happy with that. Like, that is ideal. It's not tight, and I just got a little bit. Now, how should I have checked this? Before I took this apart, what I would do is I'd put calipers on here, and I would check the max length. Okay, I'd get it like this, and I'd say, okay, that's right at 2.6, well, it's 2.597, okay, and it won't come out any further. Okay, so if I were 2.597, now if I push it, you know, I've got like 3 thousandths of collapse there. That's perfect. If you can get it like under 5 thousandths of an inch, that is ideal. Now, I know I'm mixing inches and millimeters, working with what I've got here. So my shims were millimeters, and I just measured that in inches. You know, for a conversion, millimeters, you need to divide by 25.4. This is about 10 thousandths of an inch. Okay? All right, I'm real happy with that. So we can go on to timing our motor now. Let's plug in the motor analyzer, and we'll need a standard battery pack. Charge that all the way up so that you're getting full voltage out of it. This analyzer comes with 4mm banana style connectors, but my battery is a 5mm, so I had to put little adapters in there. All right, let's get this where we can see this better. Going to mount our motor up on top here. Starts off, it gives you some options. This one says kV, RPM, voltage, and current. Then we've got motor timing. Those are the two we're going to use, the kV and the motor timing. It also will do noise level, and you can change poles of the motor, but let's focus on this. Now, this is a sensored motor. So we've got a sensor wire we're going to plug in, and that goes in here. Okay. And then we need to get our 3 leads attached correctly. Now, it says what they are on the side. So the blue is A. Okay, so we're going to take the blue, and we're going to put it on the A. Now, you'll notice something about this motor. The lugs here are away from the barrel of the motor on the edges, but in the middle one, there's no space under there. You really can't get anything under there, and that causes me a little bit of a trouble here. But I could solder a jumper lead on here, but I'm too lazy. So I'm going to put the middle one on, I'm going to hold it. So on the sides, I want to get them up here and have them not touching the case of the motor. Now, orange is the C, so I'll put that on here. Again, try to be careful, that's not touching. All right, so now I got everything on except my B, which there's not really any good way to put on here. Let's start with motor timing. So we'll do that, and I'm just going to hold that on there. Let's make sure this is up so it doesn't rock off. Okay, now one thing that you can see here is the sensor indicators light up as you turn the rotor, meaning all of our sensors are working properly. So that's good. Okay, so we're on our motor timing. We're going to hit go on that. Press to start. And it's going to cycle through here. And then it'll tell us what our total timing is and give us our individual timing. All right, this is set at 0. It's finished. 30 degrees. Okay, so 0 on this motor is 30 degrees. And we've got 31, 28, 31. Okay. It's okay. I wish they were a little closer together. That's telling me my board in the current position, it's not ideal, but it may shift back and forth a little bit as we adjust the timing. Okay, so now we know where we're at 0 here. So now let's look at what our KV and our current draw is. So let's hit go on that. We'll turn it all the way up. Okay, that's the maximum. It's at 24,000 and 2,970 kV, pulling 1.2 amps. This is the motor input voltage. This is not the output voltage. This is what my source is at. So 1.2 amps is a very low current draw. They say not to let your motor run longer than you have to at full unloaded RPM like that. So probably shouldn't let it go that long. Anyway, that's what that's telling us. So 1.2 amps, that's a really low number. So now we want to dial that up. Rule of thumb that you'll hear is that you can run unloaded at 5 to 6 amps. A lot of people say that. Of course, there's different advice in different places, but we're way low now. So I'm just going to guess that I don't know, but I'm going to assume just for the moment that if I move this from the sort of neutral timing position up to the plus 10, says this way, plus 10 over here, that's going to be 10 degrees. So that should put us at about 40. So let's see if that's true. If we take and we loosen our adjuster screws up and we turn this up to the 10, what are we going to end up at? Now, that's the other thing I don't really love about this motor, if that's true. 40 is not a very high timing. We'd like to go a little higher than that. It has no marks beyond that. So we'll press beyond, but we won't know exactly where we're at until we test it. And maybe heat generation will be a problem with this motor since it's not vented. And potentially that's why they only want you to go up to 40, if that indeed is what it is. So let's see. All right, so we're at our plus 10 here. Okay, so we'll put it back on here. All right, let's see what our timing is now. Okay, so our total timing is 42. Okay, so pretty close. And 43, 40, 43. All right, wish that were a little closer, but it is what it is. There's not really much you can do to change that. So now we're at 40. So what is our KV and current draw? So let's try that. Wait until it gets all the way up. Okay, now it's running at 30,000, pulling 2.7. Okay? So I think we can go a little further. So let's see if we can get a little more timing out of this without the current going nuts. All right, I'm just going to push this into the unknown here. Not too far. And rotating it up to kind of where the plus is here, between the plus and the 10. We don't know exactly what that's going to take it to, but we'll find out in a minute. Let's see where we're at. I like the motor is not too loud. All right, here we are. Timing, average 46. Okay, that took us way up. And we're 47, 45, 46. All right, well, it's kind of a little bit of a spread, but I'll take that. 46. Okay, that might be where we want to be, but let's check KV now. Now, this motor is going to really scream on the RPM because of that advanced timing. So let's see. All right, press and turn. All right, we're at 35,000 RPM, 4.7, 4.8 amps. I'm happy with that. So we could keep playing with this. If you were really doing a high performance motor, we'd probably press the current up a bit more to 5, maybe 6 amps. But I think because of the lack of venting on this motor and the fact that we're not really going to go into a serious race situation with this, I think that's probably good.
I still need to dial in the KV and the current draw on the second motor. And then we got to get the electronics in this team car, build up the Cougar 2 works, and get it all to the track. It could be that we have to dial back the timing on these motors because of those vintage style non-vented cases, but we'll see when we get it to the track. So if that sounds interesting to you, then we'll see you next time!